Ezra Caldwell stood at the iron gates of Middleton Academy, his hands clenched around the strap of his old backpack. The grand stone building ahead looked like it had never seen a crack, not even a scratch. It was beautiful, imposing, and it didn't look like it had been built for people like him. The morning air was sharp, almost too clean, as if the sky itself was trying to tell him he didn't belong here. "You'll be fine, Ezra," his mother had said earlier that morning, smoothing down his collar with hands that had known too much work. "They can't deny brilliance, even if they try." He had nodded, not because he believed it, but because she needed to hear it. That's what you did when you were used to being the only one in the room who looked like you. You learned how to nod, smile, and survive. The first thing he noticed when he entered the main hall wasn't the gleaming marble floor or the grand portraits of Middleton's founders staring down from the walls. It was the silence. Polite, cold silence. Students in tailored blazers moved in pairs, their laughter soft, controlled. Every now and then, a glance would flick toward Ezra, not long enough to be called a stare, but just enough to remind him that they saw him. Saw him and didn't expect him to stay. At registration, the woman at the desk glanced at his file, her lips tightening for a split second before she smiled. "Welcome, Mr. Caldwell. You'll be in Form 4A. Your seat is at the back." The back. Ezra said nothing. He took the map she handed him and made his way through corridors lined with polished glass trophies. He wasn't surprised. He had read about Middleton's subtle ways. No outright words, just quiet barriers you were supposed to accept. His classroom was already half filled when he entered. The chatter died down for a moment as he walked to his assigned seat, the last row, farthest from the board, right next to the window. The seat that had probably been empty until his arrival. He didn't mind sitting at the back. He minded being put there. As the lesson started, Ezra's eyes flickered across the room. He noticed how the teacher's gaze never landed on him. Even when he raised his hand, twice, his questions floated in the air unanswered. The other students weren't rude. They simply acted as if he wasn't there. And that was worse. It wasn't until lunch that someone spoke to him. A girl slid into the chair across from him in the courtyard, her blonde hair shining under the sun like a halo, though her grin was anything but angelic. "You Ezra Caldwell," she said, not asking but confirming. He looked up, unsure whether this was a friendly conversation or the beginning of something else. "That's me. I'm Ellie Dorset." She leaned back in her chair, balancing it on two legs. "Headmaster's daughter. Official Middleton Royal Pain." She tilted her head. "You the scholarship kid, right?" Ezra's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Ellie smirked. "Relax, I'm not here for small talk. I'm just curious. You walked in this morning like you didn't care what seat you were given. Like you were planning to stay." "I am," Ezra said, his voice quiet but firm. "Well then, Caldwell," she said, dropping the chair legs back onto the ground with a thud. "Let me give you some advice. Middleton doesn't like people who don't know their place. And you're sitting in the most invisible seat of them all." "I know," Ezra said. "That's why I'm keeping it warm." Ellie's eyes gleamed, and for a brief second, there was no mocking in her smile. "Interesting. This might get fun." The days passed, and patterns became clearer. Every class, every subject, Ezra was always placed at the back. His tests returned with perfect scores but no praise. His science project, a sleek, working model of a water filtration device, was barely glanced at during class presentations. Meanwhile, a legacy student's volcano model, which didn't even erupt properly, received claps and comments of brilliant effort. Ellie watched all of this with a kind of detached amusement. She didn't openly defend him, but she never let the silence settle without a cutting remark to someone. One afternoon, as Ezra sat in the library, surrounded by Middleton's history books, Ellery dropped a thin, dusty ledger onto his table. "Found this in the archives," she said, flipping it open to a page filled with names. She pointed at small pencil marks, faint excess next to certain names. "Scholarship students. For the past 30 years. They always get this little mark. It's not official, but it's real." Ezra's fingers traced the page. His stomach twisted. The names marked with excess never appeared in the school's awards or honors lists. They keep the appearances clean, Eloise said, sitting down across from him. They let you in. They let you study. But they don't let you win. That's Middleton's version of fairness. Ezra looked up, meeting her gaze. Why are you showing me this? Because you're not acting like a scholarship student is supposed to, Eloise said. You're not folding. I'm not here to fold, Ezra replied. His voice was calm, but inside, a fire was lighting up. I'm here to win, whether they like it or not. Eloise's smile widened. Then we might just get along, Caldwell. The bell rang, echoing through the silent library, but Ezra didn't move. His fingers rested on the page of excess, his eyes narrowing. Middleton had been playing a quiet game for years. But games had rules. And Ezra was very, very good at breaking them. The weeks passed, but nothing changed. Ezra still sat at the back of every classroom. His hands still hung in the air, ignored more often than not. When he spoke, his words were met with polite nods that went nowhere. His test scores were perfect, but when the teacher announced the top performers, his name was never mentioned. Middleton Academy didn't scream at you. It didn't push you out. It simply made you invisible. But Ezra had learned long ago that the worst kind of fight wasn't loud. It was the quiet one, where you had to keep standing even when no one saw you. One afternoon, after classes, Eloise found him in the old library again. She dropped into the chair across from him without asking. They're having a loyalty society meeting tonight, she said, her voice low. Ezra looked up from his notebook. The what? The loyalty society. She said it as if it left a bad taste in her mouth. It's a secret club of legacy families. They control how Middleton works. Who gets awards? Who gets recognized? They don't vote, they just decide. My family's been part of it for generations. Ezra raised an eyebrow. And yet you telling me this? Eloise smiled thinly. I'm not a fan of family traditions. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping. You know that science project of yours? The water filtration one? The Innovation Challenge is coming up next month. It's the biggest competition Middleton hosts. Real judges, not teachers. The winners get their names on a plaque that hangs in the Grand Hall. Ezra's chest tightened. A plaque in the Grand Hall. That would be impossible to ignore. But, Eloise continued, the Loyalty Society has already decided which team is going to win. Spoiler alert, they are awful. But they are legacy students. So they'll get it. Ezra closed his notebook slowly. Unless we make it impossible for them to ignore us. Eloise's grin returned. Exactly what I was thinking. That evening, Ezra gathered the few other scholarship students he had met. Quiet, smart kids who were used to being overlooked. He told them his plan. They would enter the Innovation Challenge as a team and win it. Not by making noise, but by creating something so brilliant, so undeniable, that Middleton would have no choice but to see them. At first, there was hesitation. They all knew how Middleton worked. But Ezra's calm certainty spread through the group like fire. Eloise, watching from the side, saw it too. If you're going to shake Middleton, she said, do it from the inside. Over the next few weeks, they worked in secret. The water filtration system became more than a project. It became a statement. Every design, every test, was a piece of quiet resistance. But Middleton wasn't going down without a fight. Teachers began losing their project submissions. Equipment they needed suddenly became unavailable. Even classroom presentations were rescheduled, always pushed to times when no one important was around to see. Ezra kept calm. He had expected it. But the real blow came a week before the competition. Ezra was called into the headmaster's office. Eloise's father sat behind a large oak desk, his hands folded neatly. His face was calm, his tone pleasant. Ezra, you're an impressive young man, he began. Your academic records are exceptional. But Middleton values harmony. We believe every student has their place, and sometimes, it's wiser to accept certain realities. Ezra's heartbeat was steady. And what place would that be, sir? The headmaster smiled gently. You've already found it, haven't you? Quietly succeeding, without stirring too much attention. The path you're on now, it might cause unnecessary disruption. It would be a shame if your future became complicated. Ezra's hands curled into fists beneath the desk. I thought Middleton valued excellence. We do, the headmaster replied smoothly. But we also value tradition. Ezra left the office with a strange calmness. They were afraid. Not of him. Of what he represented. Ellie was waiting by the hallway. Let me guess, she said. He tried to advise you? Ezra nodded. Told me I should stay in my place. Ellie's smile was sharper this time. Good. That means you're exactly where you need to be. Later that night, in the quiet of the library, Ellie slid an envelope across to Ezra. Inside is the contact of a journalist, she said. He's been waiting years to expose Middleton's little secrets. He just needed a spark. And you, Caldwell, are a wildfire. Ezra opened the envelope, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about a seat in the classroom anymore. It was about a school that had trained itself to pretend people like him didn't exist. It was about forcing them to look, and not look away. And Ezra Caldwell was done being invisible. The day of the Innovation Challenge was set. Ezra and his team had worked in silence, not because they wanted to, but because Middleton made sure no one would listen. Their water filtration system was now a masterpiece. Small, affordable, and capable of turning muddy river water into clean drinking water within minutes. But none of that mattered if no one saw it. Ezra knew Middleton's tactics. They didn't block you openly. They simply placed you last, at a time when no one cared anymore. And they did. The presentation schedule came out a week before the event. Ezra's team had been given the final slot. The last seat, once again. Presentation time, 4:45 p.m. Judges were set to leave at 4:30 p.m. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. They're really going all out, who? Ellie said, tossing the schedule onto Ezra's table. They want you to speak to empty chairs. Ezra's team looked defeated. Some mumbled about pulling out, about how it wasn't worth it. But Ezra sat quietly, flipping his pen between his fingers. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was ready. We'll present, he said simply. Whether they are there or not. Ellie's lips curled into a knowing smile. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. What no one knew was that Ellie had already set her plan in motion. The journalist, a sharp-eyed man named Simon Vance, had agreed to attend the Innovation Challenge. He wouldn't be sitting with the judges. He'd be sitting quietly in the crowd, notebook in hand, watching everything. You're not just presenting to Middleton now, Caldwell, Ellery told Ezra. You're presenting to the world. The day of the event arrived. The Grand Hall of Middleton Academy was filled with parents, students, and judges. But as expected, as the hours passed, the seats began to empty. After all, the important teams had already presented. Ezra's team sat backstage, their project ready, their nerves frayed. By 4:30 p.m., only a handful of people remained in the hall. The judges were gathering their papers, preparing to leave. Ezra stood up, adjusting his jacket. We're going out there. One of his teammates whispered, but there's no one left. There's us, Ezra said. And that's enough. They wheeled their project onto the stage. At first, no one even looked up. The few parents still present were busy chatting. The judges were halfway out of their seats. But then Ezra spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't beg for attention. He simply started explaining, clear, calm, and powerful. This is more than a school project. This is clean water for people who need it. In places where Middleton's walls don't reach. There was something about his voice that made people stop. Heads turned. Conversations died down. Ezra demonstrated the filtration system. He poured a glass of dirty water into the device. Seconds later, crystal clear water flowed into a glass. He handed it to the nearest judge, who took a hesitant sip. Silence. Then the judge drank the rest of the glass. Simon Vance, sitting quietly in the third row, was scribbling furiously. By the time Ezra's presentation ended, the judges had returned to their seats. The few people who remained were now sitting upright, eyes locked on the stage. Ezra looked at them and smiled. "We've been given the last seat in this competition. But clean water doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't care where you come from, or what name is on a plaque." He stepped back. No applause followed. Not yet. Middleton didn't clap for scholarship students. But outside that hall, things were already shifting. Simon's article was published the next morning. It wasn't a simple write-up of the competition. It was an exposé. The invisible students of Middleton Academy. He wrote about the last seat, the quiet sidelining, the loyalty society, the ledger of marked names, and most of all, he wrote about a group of students who had refused to stay invisible. The article spread like wildfire. By midday, Middleton's phone lines were flooded. Alumni called, furious. Reporters camped outside the gates. Parents questioned the school's traditions. Even the Board of Trustees demanded answers. For the first time in its history, Middleton Academy's silence was shattered. But Middleton wasn't done resisting. The headmaster called Ezra into his office one last time. "You've caused quite a storm, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his tone cold. Ezra stood, unflinching. "All I did was speak." The headmaster's smile was tight. "You've embarrassed this institution." "No, sir," Ezra replied softly. "I've exposed it." Later that week, Middleton's Excellence Awards were held. The Loyalty Society, once untouchable, had been forced to step back. The judges for the awards were now external, chosen by the trustees after public pressure. Ezra's team won Best Innovation Project. The plaque was hung in the Grand Hall. But the final moment came when the valedictorian was announced. For the first time in Middleton's history, the name called out wasn't from a legacy family. It was Ezra Caldwell. He walked onto the stage slowly, every step heavy with meaning. The last seat had become the front one. His speech was simple. "I didn't come here to take anyone's place. I came here to claim my own. Not the first seat, not the last seat. Just a fair one. For everyone who's ever been told to wait their turn, I hope today shows that the turn is now." As he stepped down, the applause was not deafening. It was respectful, thoughtful. But in the crowd, one person was standing, clapping with a grin that was both proud and defiant. Ellery Dorset. Ezra smiled back. Middleton Academy would never be the same. The news kept spreading, long after the ceremony ended. Ezra Caldwell's speech was shared online. Not because it was fiery or loud, but because it was honest. In a world where people shouted for attention, his calm defiance felt different. It hit people where it mattered. Middleton's elite families were furious. But for once, their anger wasn't enough to stop what had started. The school's board launched an inquiry into the Loyalty Society. Anonymous testimonies flooded in. Students who had been silenced for years now found their voices. But with the attention came the whispers. Some said Ezra had been used. That a legacy girl like Ellery Dorset had orchestrated the entire thing to rebel against her own family. Others said Ezra would never have made it if not for Ellie's influence. Ezra heard every word. He smiled through them. Because what they didn't understand was that Ellery hadn't saved him. She had simply refused to stand in his way. And that was all Ezra had ever needed from Middleton. A chance, not a handout. One rainy afternoon, a few days after the awards, Ellie found him sitting beneath the old oak tree behind the library. She flopped onto the wet grass beside him, uncaring. "Middleton feels different," she said, staring up at the grey sky. Ezra chuckled. "Middleton's pretending to feel different." She glanced at him. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "Not once." "You?" Ellery sighed, pulling her knees to her chest. "I think my family's disowning me. That's a fun dinner conversation." Ezra looked at her. "I'm sorry." She smiled wryly. "I'm not. I'd rather be an outcast on my own terms than a queen on theirs." They sat in silence for a while, the rain soft against their skin. Then Ellery pulled out an envelope. "What's that?" Ezra asked. "Your next battle," she said, handing it to him. Inside was a letter, an invitation from a prestigious environmental engineering program. Fully funded. Not from Middleton, but from a university that had seen his Innovation Challenge video. Ezra's throat tightened. This wasn't a token invitation. It wasn't charity. It was real. Eloise smirked at his expression. Middleton was never going to be your ceiling, Caldwell. It was just your starting line. But the real twist came a week later. An emergency assembly was called. Students packed into the grand hall, buzzing with curiosity. Ezra sat quietly near the back, his usual spot, though this time, he wasn't invisible. Headmaster Dorset walked onto the stage, his face pale. He cleared his throat. Effective immediately, the Loyalty Society has been disbanded. A ripple of murmurs spread across the hall. But that is not the only announcement, the headmaster continued. His voice was strained, like every word was a struggle. Middleton Academy will be introducing a Student Governance Council. Its purpose is to ensure every student, regardless of background, has a voice in decisions affecting their education. He paused, then added, Ezra Caldwell has been invited to chair the council's first term. For a moment, the hall was utterly still. Then, one by one, people began to clap. This time, the applause wasn't polite. It wasn't out of obligation. It was real. Ezra sat still, overwhelmed. Ellie leaned in from the row ahead. Looks like you're not sitting at the back anymore. Ezra smiled. Funny thing is, I never minded the back. I just minded being pushed there. That evening, as the sun dipped below Middleton's ancient towers, Ezra stood alone in the grand hall. The plaque with his team's names gleamed under the soft lights. He traced his fingers over his name. Ezra Caldwell. Not a legacy. Not a mistake. A name that would stay. Ellie appeared beside him, hands in her pockets. So, Chairman Caldwell, what's next? Ezra looked at her, a quiet fire in his eyes. We build. We open doors. And if anyone tries to close them, we don't ask them to move. We move right through. Ellie smiled. Sounds like a plan. Middleton Academy would never return to what it was. Because the boy who had been given the last seat now held the keys to every room. When you're constantly overlooked, it's easy to believe you don't belong. But the power to change that lies in quiet persistence and courage. The world often resists those who challenge its unfair traditions. Yet those who keep standing, even when unseen, become the ones who open doors for others. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you.